I was 6 hours away from the most important exam of my life when my father slammed my head into a table and told me my future was fake. The clock read 1:15 a.m. I'd been studying for 3 weeks straight, working 2 jobs, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. This was it. My final biochemistry exam. My ticket out of hell. 6 more hours and I'd be free. Then I heard his footsteps on the stairs. The dining room door exploded open. I didn't have time to close my textbook. Didn't have time to turn around. Didn't even have time to take a breath before his hand was on the back of my chair. He yanked it backward with me, still in it, and my forehead connected with the edge of that wooden table with a crack that echoed through the silent house. The pain was nuclear, white-hot and all-consuming. My ears rang. My vision went spotty. Blood rushed in my temples like a tsunami. And for a terrifying second, I thought I might pass out right there on the dining room floor, surrounded by chemistry notes and broken dreams. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he whispered in my ear as I sat there, dazed and shaking. While my sister watched from the doorway with a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, he said, "Your potential is fake. Your future is fake. You will never be anything." That was the moment I decided to destroy them. Not with violence. Not with screaming. But with something far more permanent. I was going to take everything they'd spent 26 years trying to kill. My ambition. My intelligence. My future. And I was going to use it to cut them out of my life. So completely they'd spend the rest of their days wondering how they lost control of the daughter they never bothered to love. If you've ever been told you're worthless by the people who were supposed to protect you, if you've ever had to choose between your sanity and your family, if you've ever wondered whether revenge can actually taste sweet, then you need to hear this story. Hit that like button and subscribe right now because what happened next is going to make you believe in justice again. Drop a comment below telling me if you've ever had to burn down your old life to build a new one. And trust me, you want to stick around for the ending? But first, let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. I was 20 when I first realized my family didn't just dislike me. They actively resented my existence. It wasn't the kind of realization that hits you all at once like a thunderbolt. It was more like watching ice slowly crack under your feet, knowing eventually you'd fall through, but unable to pinpoint exactly when the surface had become too weak to hold you. My name is Nova. Though for most of my life, I felt more like a shadow than a person. I grew up in what looked like the perfect American suburban home. 2 stories, white columns, manicured lawn. The kind of house that screamed success and stability. My father, Richard. It was a prominent figure in local business circles. Always dressed in crisp suits. Always ready with a firm handshake and a calculating smile. My mother, Susan, played her role as the dutiful wife with practiced perfection, though I never once saw her stand up for anything that mattered. And then there was Belle, my younger sister by 2 years, who seemed to absorb all the love and attention in our household like a black hole absorbs light. I was the oldest, but I might as well have been invisible. From the time I was 16, I worked 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a full course load at one of the most competitive high schools in our district. I paid for my own clothes, my own school supplies, even my own food most of the time, because dinner was often served after I left for my evening shift at the coffee shop. Belle, meanwhile, received a brand new car for her 16th birthday, a credit card with no limit, and enough designer clothes to stock a small boutique. The difference in treatment wasn't subtle. It was a canyon I tried to pretend didn't exist because acknowledging it meant acknowledging that my own parents had chosen not to love me. That's a reality no child wants to face, no matter how old they get. When I was accepted to the state university on a partial scholarship, I thought things might change. I thought maybe my father would show some pride. Maybe my mother would hug me and tell me she believed in me. Instead, my father looked at the acceptance letter like it was a bill he didn't want to pay and said, "I hope you're not expecting us to cover the rest of the tuition. We have real expenses to worry about." Belle's upcoming wedding. He meant Belle, who had dropped out of community college after 1 semester because she found it boring. He was getting married to a man she'd known for 6 months. And my parents were spending $40,000 on a ceremony that would last 4 hours. I nodded, folded the letter, and went to my room. That night, I applied for every grant, every loan, Every work-study program I could find, I would get my degree, and I would do it without them. That was the first brick in the wall I was building between myself and my family, though I didn't realize I was building it at the time. College was supposed to be my escape. Instead, it became 4 years of working myself to exhaustion while living at home because I couldn't afford both tuition and rent. I waitressed 30 hours a week, tutored for another 15, and somehow maintained a 8 gigapascals in one of the hardest majors the university offered. I studied molecular biology because I loved it, because understanding how life worked at its most fundamental level made me feel like I had some control over my own existence, and I was good at it. Really good. But being good at something didn't matter in my father's house. What mattered was appearance, status, and Belle's endless needs. When she needed a dress for a friend's wedding, I was expected to drive her to the mall and wait for 3 hours while she tried on options. When she wanted someone to photograph her for Instagram, I was handed a camera and told to make her look good. When she decided she wanted to start a jewelry business that lasted exactly 2 weeks before she got bored, my savings were rated to cover her startup costs. Money I'd earned washing dishes and serving coffee to pay for textbooks went instead to buy supplies for a venture my sister abandoned as soon as it required actual work. I want you to understand something. I didn't hate Belle. I felt sorry for her. She'd been raised to believe that her value came from her appearance and her ability to marry well. She'd never been encouraged to develop skills, to work hard, to find purpose beyond being decorative. My parents had crippled her in a different way than they'd crippled me, and I understood that even as I resented her constant demands on my time and money, the real poison in our house was my father. Richard ran our family like a corporation where he was CEO and everyone else was either an asset to be leveraged or a liability to be minimized. I was firmly in the liability column. Every conversation we had ended with him, reminding me that my degree was worthless, that my dreams were impractical, that I would never amount to anything significant. When I made the dean's list 3 semesters in a row, he didn't congratulate me. He said, "Don't let it go to your head. Good grades don't mean you're special. They just mean you're a good memorizer." My mother never contradicted him. Not once. She would hover in the background during these interactions, wringing her hands and looking uncomfortable, but never, ever telling him to stop. Her silence was its own form of cruelty. Maybe worse than his words because it taught me that even the person who was supposed to protect me had decided I wasn't worth protecting. There were small moments of rebellion. Chloe, my best friend from sophomore year of college, was the only person who saw what was happening and called it what it was. Abuse. I hated that word. It felt too dramatic, too victim-coded. But Chloe didn't let me minimize it. She'd grown up in foster care, had seen real dysfunction, and she recognized the signs. We would meet at the university library at midnight after my shifts ended, and she would quiz me for exams while feeding me snacks from her backpack because she knew I often skipped meals to save money. She was the one who convinced me to apply for the advanced research program in my senior year. Even though I was terrified of adding more to my plate, she was the one who reminded me that I had value beyond what my family saw. By the spring of my senior year, I was running on fumes. I was 26 years old, had been in undergrad for 6 years because I could only afford to take a partial course load while working full-time, and I was so close to finishing I could taste it. One more semester. One final exam in advanced biochemistry that would complete my degree requirements and open doors to graduate programs and real career opportunities. I studied like my life depended on it because, in a very real sense, I did. That's what made the night of July 1st so unforgivable. It was a Monday night, technically Tuesday morning by the time everything fell apart. My exam was scheduled for 8 a.m. I'd been studying for 3 weeks, had every formula memorized, every concept mapped out in my mind. I just needed 6 more hours. 6 hours to review my notes one final time, to make sure I had the enzyme pathways down cold, to practice the problems I knew would be on the test. I set up in the dining room because my bedroom was directly below Belle's, and I'd learned years ago that any noise from my room would result in complaints that I was disturbing her beauty sleep. The dining room was on the first floor, far from the bedrooms. With good lighting and a table big enough to spread out my materials, I wore noise-canceling headphones to block out the sound of my own pencil on paper. paranoid about making even the smallest disruption. At midnight, Belle came downstairs. She was wearing silk pajamas that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and a cashmere robe that had been a gift from my father. She didn't greet me. I didn't ask how my studying was going. She just stood in the doorway, looked at me with barely concealed disdain, and said, "You need to be quieter. I can hear you thinking from upstairs." I want you to understand how absurd that statement was. I was sitting in near total silence, with headphones on, writing on paper, but that's how it was in our house. Belle's comfort trumped everything, including physics and basic logic. For the first time in months, I didn't immediately apologize and make myself smaller. I was so tired, so impossibly tired, and this was the last night I would ever have to study in this house if I could just get through this exam. I pulled off my headphones and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was 24 and had never worked a day in her life. She'd never worried about tuition or rent or whether she could afford to eat that day. She had no idea what it meant to fight for something, to sacrifice, to push yourself beyond what you thought you could endure. My voice was quiet but steady when I said, "Belle, this is my last exam. I need one more night. Just tonight." Her face twisted with anger, and for a second I saw my father in her features. The same entitlement, the same inability to conceive of anyone else's needs as legitimate. She stepped closer, and her voice went sharp. "You think your stupid degree is more important than me getting proper rest. My appearance is what has value in this family. Nova, you're just a little bookworm playing pretend that you matter. You're wasting everyone's time, including your own." I should have known that exchange would bring my father downstairs. I should have packed up my books right then and moved to my car or the 24-hour diner across town or anywhere else. But I was too tired to think strategically, and some part of me still believed that if I just explained clearly enough, if I just made them understand how important this was, they would show me mercy. At 1:15 a.m., my father appeared. The violence wasn't new. It was just more direct than usual. He grabbed the back of my chair and yanked it, and my head connected with the table with enough force to make my vision swim with black spots. The sound echoed through the quiet house, a sharp crack that should have horrified everyone who heard it. Instead, my father leaned down, his face inches from mine, and whispered with the kind of calculated cruelty that takes practice. His breath was hot against my ear, and his words were deliberate, designed to wound. "Sleep. Put these books away. Put away this entire fantasy. You will never be as valuable as she is. Your potential is fake. Your future is fake. This," he gestured at my notes, "is a waste of everyone's time and resources." He grabbed my textbook and hurled it across the room. Then my notebooks. Then the stack of practice problems I'd printed at the library because I couldn't afford to print them at home. Papers fluttered through the air like wounded birds. And I sat there, head throbbing, ears ringing, watching 6 years of work scatter across the floor. My mother appeared in the doorway. For one brief, stupid moment, I thought she might intervene. She looked at me, at the mess, at my father's twisted expression of satisfaction, and then she turned around and went back upstairs. That was the moment. Not the violence, though that was certainly part of it, but my mother's retreating footsteps, the sound of her choosing silence over defending me one more time. That was what made something fundamental shift inside my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I sat perfectly still until my father went back to bed, until I heard Belle's door close, until the house was silent again. Then I got down on my hands and knees and gathered every sheet of paper, every note card, every scribbled formula. My hands were shaking, and my head was pounding, but I worked with absolute focus. I couldn't study anymore. The concussion I almost certainly had made it impossible to focus on the detailed material, so instead, I took out my phone and began photographing every page of notes, uploading them to a cloud drive so I could review them in the morning. I worked until 3 a.m., and then I sat on the dining room floor and made a decision. I was going to pass this exam. I was going to graduate, and then I was going to systematically dismantle every tool my family had used to control me. And I was going to do it in a way that was so methodical, so airtight, that they would never be able to claw their way back into my life. I didn't sleep. At 6 a.m., I took a shower, drank 3 cups of coffee, and ate a protein bar that tasted like cardboard. My head still throbbed, and there was a faint bruise forming on my forehead. But I covered it with makeup and headed to campus early. On the way out, I passed the kitchen where my mother was making Belle's favorite breakfast: eggs Benedict, fresh squeezed orange juice, artisanal bread. From the bakery across town, I grabbed a granola bar from the pantry, and my father appeared in the doorway, blocking my path. He looked me up and down with undisguised contempt and said, "Don't embarrass us today. Don't cry if you fail. Don't make a scene. People are watching." Belle appeared behind him, designer sunglasses on even though we were inside, holding her phone in one hand like a weapon. "Oh, and Nova, I need you to drive me to my nail appointment at 3. Make sure you're done with your little test by then." Every instinct I developed over 26 years told me to nod. Apologize. Promise to be available. But something had broken during the night, or maybe something had finally healed enough to function properly. I looked at Belle, then at my father, and said one word: "No." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face went from surprise to furious in less than a second. "What did you say?" My voice didn't waver. I said, "No. I'm not your driver anymore. I'm not your emotional support servant. I'm not here to make your lives more convenient." I could see my father's hand twitching. I could see him calculating whether he could get away with hitting me again. But we weren't in the privacy of our dining room anymore. We were in the kitchen with windows facing the street. And it was broad daylight. I walked past him, out the door, and didn't look back. The exam was brutal. 3 hours of complex problems that required total mental clarity, which I definitely didn't have. But every time my concentration wavered, every time the headache threatened to overwhelm me, I thought about my father's words. Fake potential. Fake future. I thought about years of being told I was worthless, that my intelligence was meaningless, that my dreams were delusions, and I used that rage like fuel. When I finished the exam 45 minutes early and looked over my work, I knew I'd aced it. Not because I was naturally brilliant, but because I'd earned every piece of knowledge, had fought for every concept I understood, had paid for my education in ways that had nothing to do with money. I walked out of that exam room feeling dangerous. Not weak, not victimized, but dangerous in the way that people become when they finally stop trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. The first thing I did was go to student services. I told them everything. I showed them the bruise on my forehead, which had darkened to a deep purple by midday. I showed them text messages from my father berating me for various imagined failures. I played them a voice recording I'd started keeping 6 months earlier when my father had gone on a 20-minute rant about how I was genetically inferior to Belle. The woman behind the desk, her name tag read Margaret, listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time, concern that wasn't performative. She said, "How old are you?" 26. "Are you currently living with them?" "Yes." "Do you have somewhere safe you can stay?" I thought about Chloe's offer, repeated a dozen times over the past few years, to let me crash on her couch. I nodded. Margaret made 3 phone calls while I sat there. Within an hour, I had a meeting scheduled with the dean of students, a referral to the campus counseling center, and information about emergency housing available to students in crisis situations. She also gave me the direct number for campus police and made me promise to call if my father tried to contact me at school. The university moved faster than I dared to hope. Within 48 hours, they'd opened an official investigation into harassment and issued a no-contact order that prohibited my father and mother from entering campus property or contacting any university staff on my behalf. They couldn't come to my graduation ceremony, couldn't use their connections to interfere with my academic opportunities. I couldn't leverage their reputation to undermine me. The punishment was quiet but devastating for people who lived and breathed social standing. My father, who'd served on several community boards and loved dropping the name of his alma mater, was effectively exiled from the institution he'd claimed as his own achievement for years. Better yet, the university offered me a room in graduate student housing for the remaining 6 weeks of the semester, funded by an emergency support grant. It was a tiny studio apartment with a shared bathroom down the hall, but it was mine. No one could walk in without permission. No one could throw my belongings around or tell me I was worthless while I ate cereal standing at the kitchen counter. I moved my essential items there within 24 hours. I took one trip back to my parents' house when I knew they'd be at Belle's final wedding dress fitting, loaded my car with clothes, my computer, and the few belongings that mattered, and left a note on the kitchen counter. It read, "I will graduate on July 28th. Do not attend. Do not contact me. Do not try to use your connections to interfere with my career. I am done." I didn't wait to see their reaction. I didn't need to. The next 2 weeks were surreal. I existed in this strange bubble of freedom, mixed with hypervigilance, always waiting for my father to show up and cause a scene. For Belle to show up needing something and expecting me to provide it. But campus security had my back. And my family seemed to have finally understood that their usual tactics wouldn't work. My phone exploded with messages. Of course, angry texts from my father about respect and duty, and how I was destroying the family. Crying voicemails from my mother about how I was breaking her heart, and didn't I understand everything they'd sacrificed for me. Vicious messages from Belle calling me selfish, ungrateful, jealous of her happiness. I read them all once, documented them for my records, and then muted the group chat. Their words had no power anymore because I'd stopped believing that their love was something I needed to earn. Professor Harrison, my biochemistry professor and the one who'd written my strongest recommendation letter for graduate programs, called me into his office one afternoon. He was a stern man in his 60s who rarely showed emotion, but when I sat down across from him, he looked genuinely concerned. "Ms. Nova, I heard about the situation with your family. I wanted you to know that I spoke with several colleagues, and we all agree your performance in this program has been exceptional. I've taken the liberty of reaching out to some contacts I have at research institutions and biotech companies on your behalf." I must have looked shocked because he smiled slightly and continued. "You're one of the most dedicated students I've taught in 30 years. The fact that you've managed to excel while working full-time and dealing with a difficult home situation tells me you have the kind of resilience that can't be taught. I want to make sure that's recognized." Within a week, I had 3 interview requests. One from a pharmaceutical company, one from a university research lab, and one from a prestigious national company that ran a paid rotation program for recent graduates, including relocation assistance and mentorship opportunities. I did all 3 interviews in borrowed professional clothes from Chloe's closet. I was honest about my circumstances when asked about my background, framing it as a story of perseverance rather than victimhood. And I nailed every single one. The offer from the national company came first. A salary that was more money than I'd ever imagined making. Comprehensive benefits. A moving stipend. And a start date 2 weeks after graduation. The recruiter told me they'd received over 200 applications and only offered positions to 12 candidates. When I got the email, I was sitting in my tiny studio apartment, eating ramen because it was cheap and I was still in survival mode. I read the offer letter 3 times to make sure it was real. And then I called Chloe. She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. See, I told you. Your father was wrong about literally everything. She was right. My potential wasn't fake. My future wasn't fake. And I'd built both of them with my own hands. In spite of everything my family had done to convince me I was worthless. I wanted to accept the offer immediately, but I made myself wait 24 hours to review the contract properly. I also reached out to Campus Career Services to make sure everything was legitimate. This was real. This was my ticket out. The day I signed the contract was the day I stopped looking over my shoulder. My father, predictably, tried to interfere. He somehow got the name of the company and called their HR department, demanding to speak with the hiring manager. He claimed I was mentally unstable, that I'd lied on my application, that hiring me would be a liability for the company. The HR department's response was professional and devastating. They told him that his call was being logged as inappropriate contact, that all of my references had been verified through proper channels, and that any further attempts to interfere with their employment decisions would be forwarded to their legal department. They also called me to let me know what had happened and to assure me that his interference hadn't impacted their decision in any way. When I hung up the phone, I laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in months. My father's power had always been rooted in his ability to control narratives and leverage social connections, but in a professional environment with clear ethical guidelines, his tactics were not just ineffective, but actively harmful to his own reputation. Belle's graduation happened on a Saturday, 3 weeks before mine. I didn't attend, obviously, but Chloe had a friend who was there and sent me updates throughout the day. Apparently, campus security stopped my parents at the entrance to the ceremony when their names were flagged in the system. My father made a scene, demanding to speak with the university president, threatening lawsuits and pulling donations he'd never actually made. Security escorted them off campus. Belle's graduation proceeded without them. And according to Chloe's friend, Belle spent the entire ceremony looking miserable, constantly checking her phone, probably trying to coordinate with our parents, who were sitting in a parking lot a mile away. Fuming, the irony wasn't lost on me. Belle, who'd been given everything, had her special day ruined by the consequences of our parents' treatment of me, and I felt absolutely nothing about it. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just a vague sense that justice existed in the universe after all. The social fallout for my parents was more severe than I'd anticipated. My father's behavior at the graduation had been witnessed by several prominent community members who served on boards with him. Word spread quickly about his inappropriate conduct, and within weeks, he was quietly asked to step down from his position on the local volunteer advisory board. His reputation, the thing he valued above almost everything else, was tarnished. My mother called me once during this period, her voice small and broken. "How could you do this to us? We're your parents. We loved you. We gave you everything." I thought about hanging up. I thought about screaming. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, very calmly, "You didn't love me. You tolerated me as long as I was useful. You took money I earned to fund Belle's hobbies. You told me my dreams were worthless while spending tens of thousands of dollars on a wedding for a marriage that's probably going to fail. You let Dad hit me the night before my final exam because I was studying too loudly. That's not love. That's not even basic human decency." There was a long silence. And then my mother said, in the most infuriating combination of self-pity and denial, "You're twisting everything. You're making us sound like monsters. We were just trying to teach you resilience." I hung up. There was no point in continuing that conversation. She was never going to admit what they'd done, never going to apologize, never going to take accountability. And I didn't need her to anymore. Graduation day for me was perfect in its simplicity. Chloe came, along with Professor Harrison and a handful of classmates who'd become friends over the years of late-night study sessions. When my name was called, I walked across that stage in a borrowed cap and gown, shook the dean's hand, and accepted my diploma. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no triumphant music, no tearful reconciliation, no last-minute realization from my family that they'd been wrong. It was just me, completing something I'd worked for through 6 years of exhaustion and humiliation and self-doubt, but it was mine. Every step I'd taken to get there, I'd taken myself, and that made it worth more than any congratulations my family could have offered. Professor Harrison took me out for coffee afterward and gave me a gift, a leather-bound journal with my name embossed on the cover. Inside the front cover, he'd written to Nova, who proved that talent and determination can overcome any obstacle. "Your future is limited only by your own imagination. Congratulations on earning what you've worked so hard to achieve." I cried then, in the coffee shop, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, of having someone recognize that my achievements were legitimate, that my struggle had been real, that I deserved to be proud of myself. The move to the new city happened 2 weeks later. Chloe helped me pack my few belongings into a used sedan I'd bought with my signing bonus. We ate pizza on the floor of my empty studio apartment the night before I left, and she made me promise to call her every week. "You did it," she said, raising her paper cup of cheap wine in a toast. "You actually got out. We did it." I corrected. "I couldn't have survived without you." She shook her head. "Nope. This was all you. Nova, I just reminded you of what was already there. Your strength. Your worth. All of that was always yours." Before I left the next morning, I did one final thing. I sent a text message to the family group chat. I hadn't checked in weeks. It was short and to the point. I am leaving today. I have a job, an apartment, and a future that you have no part in. Do not contact me. Do not try to visit. Do not reach out to my employers or friends. I am not your daughter anymore, in any way that matters. Goodbye. I blocked all of their numbers before I could see the responses. The drive to my new city took 6 hours. 6 hours of highway stretching out before me. 6 hours of terrible radio and gas station coffee. 6 hours of slowly realizing that I was actually free. No one knew me in this new place. No one had preconceived notions about my worth or my potential. I could be whoever I decided to be. My apartment was small but clean, on the 3rd floor of a renovated building in a neighborhood full of restaurants and bookstores. It had hardwood floors, large windows that let in morning light, and a bathroom that was just mine. I spent my first night there sitting on an air mattress, eating takeout Thai food, and watching the city lights sparkle outside my window. There was no furniture yet, no decorations, nothing to make it feel like home, but it was quiet. It was safe. And it was a beginning. Work started the following Monday. The rotation program placed me with a team researching enzyme interactions, exactly the kind of work I'd spent 6 years studying. My colleagues were smart and welcoming, and no one asked why a 26-year-old was just finishing her undergraduate degree. They just cared whether I could do the work. And I could. Over the next few months, I built a life that looked nothing like the one I'd left behind. I made friends with people from my cohort who had no connection to my past. I joined a running club because I'd never had time for hobbies before and wanted to see what I'd been missing. I went to therapy. Real therapy, with a licensed counselor who specialized in family trauma, and slowly began to unpack 26 years of emotional abuse. The therapist, Dr. Chen, asked me during our 3rd session if I felt guilty for leaving. I thought about it honestly before answering. Sometimes, I was conditioned to feel responsible for their happiness. But I'm learning that their happiness wasn't my job. Their failure to love me wasn't my failure. It was theirs. She nodded. That's exactly right. Abusive systems teach you that you're the problem. Breaking free means recognizing that you were never the problem. You were just the only one brave enough to stop participating in a sick dynamic. 6 months after leaving, I got a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from Belle. She'd tracked down my employer somehow and sent it to my work address. The letter was 5 pages long, handwritten, and devastating in its lack of self-awareness. She wrote about how I'd destroyed our family, how our parents cried every day over losing me, how she'd had to postpone her honeymoon because Mom was too depressed to be left alone. She wrote about how selfish I was, how I'd always been jealous of her, how I'd used my education as an excuse to feel superior, and then, in the last paragraph, almost as an afterthought, she wrote, I don't understand why you had to make such a big deal out of everything. So Dad pushed you a little. So we asked you to help out with stuff. That's what families do. You were never abused. Nova, you were just dramatic. I read that letter twice, and then I put it in a folder labeled Evidence along with all the other documentation I'd kept. Not because I planned to use it legally, but because sometimes, when the guilt crept in late at night, I needed to remind myself that I hadn't imagined the toxicity. It was real. It was documented. And I'd been right to leave. I didn't respond to Belle's letter. There was nothing to say. We lived in fundamentally different realities, and I had no interest in trying to convince her of mine. A year after leaving, I was promoted to a research assistant position with my own small projects. 2 years after leaving, I was accepted into a master's program with full funding. 3 years after leaving, I published my first co-authored paper in a respected scientific journal. My life wasn't perfect. I still had nightmares sometimes where I was back in that house, still trying to earn love that would never come. I still flinched sometimes when someone raised their voice. I still struggled with the impulse to apologize for taking up space, but I was healing. Slowly. Imperfectly. But genuinely, I thought about my family sometimes, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep. I wondered if they'd ever understood what they'd done. If they'd ever acknowledged their part in driving me away. I doubted it. People like my father don't develop self-awareness in their 60s. And people like my mother don't suddenly find courage after a lifetime of complicity. Belle sent 2 more letters over the years, each one following the same pattern: self-pity disguised as concern, accusations disguised as love, manipulation disguised as family obligation. I stopped reading them after the first paragraph. Whatever she wanted from me, whatever they all wanted, I couldn't provide it, and I'd stopped feeling guilty about that. On the 5-year anniversary of leaving, I did something I'd been planning for months. I wrote a letter to my younger self, to the girl who'd sat in that dining room with a concussion and a head full of formulas, believing she had to earn the right to exist. I wrote, "Dear Nova," the one who's reading this in the dark while everyone else sleeps, the one who's terrified and exhausted and convinced she's not enough. You are enough. You've always been enough. Your family's inability to see your value says nothing about your worth and everything about their limitations. One day, you're going to walk away from that house, and you're going to build a life that makes sense. A life where your dreams matter, where your effort is recognized, where you're not constantly apologizing for existing. It's going to be hard. Some days, it's going to feel impossible. But I promise you, from the other side of that impossibility, it's worth it. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. It leads somewhere beautiful. Trust yourself. Protect yourself. And when the moment comes to leave, don't hesitate. Your future is waiting. And it's real. Love. Nova. I folded that letter and put it in the same box as Belle's letters and my father's angry voicemails and my mother's guilt trips. Then, I took the entire box and put it in the back of my closet. Not thrown away, because denying the past doesn't help anyone. But archived. It happened. It shaped me. But it doesn't define me anymore. My life now is mine in a way I never thought possible. I have colleagues who respect my work, friends who value my presence, a therapist who validates my experiences, and a future limited only by my own choices. I wake up in the morning without dread. I go to sleep at night without fear. I exist without constantly calculating how to make myself smaller, more palatable, less of an inconvenience. Is it everything I dreamed of when I was 26 and desperate? Not exactly. Real life is more complicated than fantasies of escape. There are still hard days. Still, moments of loneliness. Still times when I wonder what it would have been like to have a family that actually loved me. But it's mine. Every success, every failure, every decision. It's mine. And honestly, that's enough. That's more than enough. If you're reading this, and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're trapped in a relationship where your worth is constantly questioned and your achievements are constantly minimized, I want you to know something. You're not crazy. You're not dramatic. You're not asking for too much when you want basic respect and support. And the fear you feel about leaving, it's real. But it's not a reason to stay. I left with no money, no safety net, and no guarantee that things would work out. And they did. Not perfectly, not easily, but they did. Your situation might be different. Your resources might be more limited. Your obstacles might be more severe. But if I could do it, you can too. The people who love you don't make you feel worthless. The people who love you don't use your vulnerabilities against you. The people who love you don't require you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. And if the people in your life do those things, they don't love you. Not really. And you don't owe them your future. I'm Nova. I survived a family that tried to convince me I was nothing. And I built a life that proves them wrong every single day. Your turn starts whenever you're ready. So tell me, have you ever had to choose between your family and your future? Have you ever been in a situation where the people who were supposed to support you became the biggest obstacles to your success? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And if this story resonated with you, if you see yourself or someone you love in these words, please hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward getting out. Your future is waiting. And I promise you, it's not fake.